Good morning, everybody. My name is Toban. I am a writer, farmer, and co-owner of Burr Forest Group, which is a collective of creative professionals focused on raising the communications and marketing standards in the ag sector. Together with fellow co-owner Ryan Sanchi, who is on the call here today, we engage a large team of creative professionals, all of whom are experts in their respective fields. Today's presenter, Tyler Funk, an accomplished photographer slash videographer, is no exception to this. Today's session is focused on the kinds of photography we do as farmers, as agronomists, and as people interested in taking ag-related pics throughout the growing season. We use our cells, we use our DSLRs, we do things quickly, sometimes with dirty lenses and sometimes without giving much thought to what we're capturing. Tyler is an award-winning cinematographer from Manitoba. He's also a director, editor, and photographer. Tyler's goal in his career is to work on emotionally charged, socially conscious, and challenging content while pushing himself to deliver visually striking images.
First thing I want to discuss is composition. Composition is, just how you frame your shot. I'm still learning a little bit about the different kinds of photography that and video that you need to do for your jobs. I've seen a variety of different posts on Twitter, whether it's holding up a root or seeing an entire field or close-ups of plants in growing in the ground from the ground to the top of the plant. All of these different kinds of, this is all composition. Two major ways to frame your shot. There's center framing, and then there's the rule of thirds. So center framing is a good use for any time that you're wanting to show one specific detail. So for example, if there's, like Toban said, if there's a leaf with some browning or yellow, or maybe some bugs have been chewing away at a leaf. Center framing is just making whatever you want your audience to look at, putting it right at the very center of your shot. And this can be really effective for bringing the eye to the detail that is most important. So you are the professionals. When you go out, you know what you're looking for. And it's your job to convey your knowledge into the photograph. So if there's something specific on the root, for example, sometimes it can be very effective to photograph it where that detail is the very center of the photo. So that's good for details and close-ups. It can help your viewer focus in on exactly what you want them to, because that's what photography is all about, is showing people what you want to show them, or what you want them to see. Rule of thirds is a little, I guess, maybe just like a little trick to nice photographs. So even this sample right here that you're seeing with the plants growing out of the ground here, there is a slight rule of thirds going on here. So what you do is you take your frame, whether it's your camera or your phone, and you divide it into three sections. And it can be helpful. There's a grid setting very often on phones or cameras that can help you find the thirds. So if you break your image up into three and where those lines line up. So my frame, if you're seeing me right now, like this would be the three sections of the rule of thirds. So these are the lines. So very often what you do for like wide shots of a field or a wide shot of if you're filming or you're photographing a farmer in the field, or very often it helps with human subjects or animals or things like that. But you just kind of put them off onto one of the third lines, and you'll find very quickly that your photo presents itself in it just looks nicer. I won't get into the psychology behind it, but there is just something about when you frame for thirds, it's more pleasing to the eye. So like I said in the slide here, using a grid, there's now every phone, every camera is different. I'm not going to go through all of the, all the settings, but I think it's often easy to find, but I like I said, every phone is different, every camera is different, but you can choose the grid setting, and that can be helpful for framing. And often the grid setting also has horizontal lines, which can also be very helpful for keeping your horizon straight. It's just another little trick. If you are looking at photos on Twitter or wherever, and you see that there's a picture where it's crooked, it's just like the horizon is a little bit off. Our minds immediately think of that image as not as nice. There's just something, we are used to seeing horizon lines, especially in fields, because it's flat and it goes way out there. You want that line to be straight, especially on wide shots. And the grid setting can help, where you just kind of line up your horizon with the grid line that is horizontal. That can be helpful for just a better shot. On to lighting here. There's a nice picture of Toban here that he included. And so lighting is something, again, really important to consider. So I'm going to imagine that when it's an overcast day, lighting is a little bit less, let's say, challenging or important. If it's overcast, light almost always looks good. So I'm going to focus more on when it's a bright, sunny day. I think that's a major thing to consider, especially because often you are out in the fields photographing. Oh, and I should back up a little bit. I am covering photography, knowing that you also do some video, but a lot of the rules that apply to photography apply to video. And I think that if you think about how to get a great photograph, that applies to a great video. So that's why I'm focusing purely on photography right now. And then at the end, we'll discuss a bit about video. Okay, so lighting. When you're out in the field and you have an assignment of different photos that you need to take, thinking about where the sun is, like literally taking note of where it is and how is it shining on whatever it is you're wanting to photograph. So I know you can't always control the time of day that you go out to photograph, but there's a general rule where morning light is the best and evening light is the best. Our summers are difficult because the sun is high and above and straight above for so long during the day. And that's okay, but it creates challenges. When the sun is lower, the light looks better. So morning and evening. So if you're ever like, oh man, I got to get a really good, big, wide field shot, or you're out with some other people and you need to photograph, some portraits of a farmer or of somebody, try to get that in the morning or later in the day, because that's just light is just more pleasing, but you can't always control that. So sun is high, maybe it's let's say it's 2 p.m. and it's at a slight angle, but it's still really high. One major thing you want to there's the thing about photography, there are no rules, but it's good to have some internal rules just for yourself. So one thing I would say is try to not have the sun directly behind you when you photograph. So there's an obvious reason for that, is shadows. You will create a shadow with your body or your phone, depending on how close up you are, or depending on what you're photographing. So you don't want shadows. So that can easily be, shadows can be eliminated if the sun isn't behind you. So what you want is, you want to kind of, so for example, this image here, that of this close-up of this plant growing here, I'm trying to actually figure out exactly where the sun is, but it looks like it's very much either directly above or maybe a little bit behind. It looks like maybe it's a little bit backlit. So you don't want the sun behind you. What you want is, it's nice to have, so I wrote here 3/4 lighting. This image of Toban here, you'll see that there is a brighter light on the side of his face, and a little bit, it's on his left, or if you're looking at the picture, it's on the right side. It's a little bit brighter. What that kind of approach, so when you're photographing a plant, if you want to imagine, if you want to think of the sun filling the side of it or 3/4 of it, so it's not directly in front, it's not directly beside or directly behind, but it's more like 3/4 of hitting the plant, or a face, depending on what you're photographing. And what that does is that creates, it creates shadow, and shadow is nice because it creates, if you allow for a little bit of shadow in your subject, it creates shape, and it just kind of, it's almost like a way of carving out the image, like the light kind of carves it out. And another appealing approach to lighting is imagining or having the sun behind your subject. That can be helpful too, because what that does to it kind of creates this sort of backlit. It almost has, if you look at this plant, it almost looks like it's glowing. And the way I imagine it or think about it is, the light is cutting out the image. So maybe if you want to break down lighting, just don't have the sun directly behind you. That's the big one, I would say. Any questions on lighting, or any or anything?
I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I don't know how many photos I've taken where I think it's going to be a great photo, but the sun is behind the subject. And I know we probably all know this already, but I still make the mistake all the time where it looks good to me, like the human eye captures it. I can see the subject lit by the sun behind that person or thing. And I take the photo and it's just black and, like, just this over, anyway. So maybe just a reminder that's also not, you don't want the sun behind you, but you also don't want the sun directly behind your subject either. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say so, yeah, because if you are wanting to experiment with the sun directly behind you, if you're using phones specifically, phones are typically, everything's automatic, like all the settings are auto, and phones have a bit, when you're relying on auto settings, it's harder for phones and cameras to understand what it is that you're wanting to expose for. So if you have the sun shining on whatever subject you have, if it's on the side or a little bit from the front off to the side, front, 3/4, the camera will understand how to expose for that a little bit easier, because the subject that you're photographing will be lit nicely and properly. It's just a shot list. So this is yeah, so when so again, let's say you have the task to photograph, I use the example here of a plant that has had some bug issues. Some bugs have been eating some plants, and And your job is to photograph that, the problem. So there's what I would suggest doing is thinking about your photography as a bit of a story. And when you go to the field and you're told photograph a plant that's been eaten by bugs, what's a nice way to think about it is think of it as a story. And the best way to tell a story with photos is, well, maybe not the best way, but one way of thinking about it is wide, medium, tight. This is something that I do all the time. It's been ingrained in my head, and it applies to video too, and it applies to photography, I would say, where you want a wide shot, a medium shot, and a tight. So a wide shot is the whole field, showing where you are. It's placing you. It's telling your audience where you are. Medium focuses in a little bit more, and so let's say a wide shot is the whole field. There's maybe a little tree off in the distance. The sun is setting. You got your nice your little scene of where you are. A medium shot is maybe moving in. So let's say you eventually want to get that close up of the leaf that has been eaten by a bug, but you want to start wider. You go into medium where you see 5 or 6 or 10 sort of plants kind of like in a row. So this is kind of showing your audience, okay, this is what I want to talk about. I want to show you. And then you go in for your tight shots. Your tight shots are the details, maybe that center framing idea where, but your wide shots are maybe the rule of thirds for a nice photo. And always trying to keep your horizon straight is important too. And then when you go in for your close-ups, then that's where you're getting your details of the plants being eaten. And just a little tip when using phones with close-ups, it can be very helpful when you tap on whatever it is you want in focus. That can be really, you tap and hold. I think most phones are like that. That just helps with making sure your close-up is in focus, because phones sometimes have a little bit of a back and forth. What am I focusing on? Is it behind the thing, or so that can be helpful. And so this is all, the point of this is to get variety. I think with photography, especially with digital, you can take 10, 20, 30 photos and there's no reason not to, especially if you're struggling with like technical issues in any way. So getting variety is really helpful. And also you might find yourself on the computer when you're kind of processing everything. It's like, oh man, I wish I didn't have only close-up of leaves. I wish I had something wider to kind of present the scene, so yeah, I'm always, when I approach any photography, I think of wide, medium, and tight. So then the thing to add to that would be to have a variety of angles. I'm going to go back one slide to the plant here. This image of this small little plant growing here is really beautiful because it's a perspective that when you're walking through a field, you don't get to see this perspective. Most people don't see this perspective of plants because we are usually taller than them and we're usually looking down at them. So it's very, I think it's tempting to photograph from our perspective, the way we see things, which is with plants in particular, it's very easy to photograph from above. But what I would push and encourage is to try different angles, and you'll be surprised at the things that you'll see. And I think, again, that's where photography is really amazing, is that you can show people a perspective that we don't normally see. It's not often that we're lying on the ground looking at plants, right? So it's nice when you can put your camera down and get that perspective. So yeah, high angles, low angles, and maybe try something fun. Maybe you put the camera down on the ground and it's looking up at the plants. You might find something there. You might find a bug hiding underneath a leaf. That's happened to me. um, so yeah, that's and then there's the obvious like variety of horizontal and vertical framing too. And again, it's all about variety, I think, because you'll find yourself on the computer or however you post your images, that I think you'll be happy that you have variety versus only one option. So I've noticed on Twitter that there's been some images of like using like a backdrop, like a white backdrop or something like that. And I was thinking that it might be valuable to have a little piece of foam core. So for example, if you're photographing roots, you pull out a plant, it can be complicated. It can be hard to see the details of roots or these tiny little things if you're holding them in your hand and photographing, or if you're just or if they're hanging and you photograph, or the worst would be lying on like the dirt, because it's just so hard to see the details. So I just thought of like a little tip might be to have a piece of foam core. Maybe it's a a 1x1x2 or 2x2 sort of piece, or whatever is whatever would make sense to put the plants or whatever you're photographing. Might be nice to use something like that for small details. Yeah, and I just kind of wrote out a little. I think I kind of explained the using photos as a story. Any questions on that?
I, yeah, and I hope there are. I just wanted to kind of just talk a little bit. Being in the industry for years, I think that foam core idea is kind of is a really useful one, Tyler. Like just to have that, working agronomist, to have them in your truck or your vehicle, to have kind of with you just as a fun background. And part of this discussion leading up to this presentation was, Tyler and I chatted, and even Tyler said, he's like, a lot of the photos that I'm seeing on Twitter are really good. Like they're good. Everyone's taking really good photos. So part of this is just to kind of inspire you all to play with angles, to try something different, to make sure you have that kind of variety, and just feel kind of encouraged by Tyler, a working professional, to continue doing that, and just the importance of that variety. But that's it.
Section here before you shoot. So there's just like maybe just some basics, maybe things seem, maybe it's just obvious, but this has happened to me. I show up and and maybe I forgot a battery, or forgot my SD card, and I'm ready to photograph and I can't. So just super obvious, but it's because we are always doing so many things, and I understand this is a small part of what you do professionally. So I would imagine that it's probably easy to yeah, forget some of these smaller details, but like, is your phone charged? Is your camera charged? Or do you have extra batteries along? Memory card space and space on your phone? Do you need to, clear space on your phone so you can take videos or photos? You might, sometimes I know I've been on assignments to do video and out in the fields, and it can sometimes be a really long drive, and the last thing you want to do is show up and realize that you don't have the things that you need. um, you know and then an obvious one, cleaning the lens, especially with phones. It's so easy to get a fingerprint without noticing on your phone. You take a bunch of pictures, it's hard to see your screen with the bright sun, and you're getting all the different frames, but you might find later on like everything looks washed out, and like weird kind of lens flares and stuff, and that's just very often just a dirty lens. So double check that. And then before you head out, if you have the time to think about, just simple questions to ask yourself: what is the purpose of the photos you're taking? Who is your audience? Yeah, like, why are you taking these pictures? And what can you do? What can you bring to the pictures that might make them a little bit more interesting or more engaging? Because again, I think you are in a position where you know a lot about what you're photographing. And sometimes it can be like, I know for myself, I'm often tasked with getting photos and video of Winnipeg. I'm from Winnipeg, and it can be really hard to photograph or take video of something that I know so well. It can be a real challenge to be like, well, everybody knows Winnipeg, like everybody knows, the museum or the Forks, but if I put myself in a position where I'm like, well, what if you've never been to Winnipeg? That kind of changes my approach and my perspective on what I'm capturing. And it's kind of like imagining seeing these things for the first time can be helpful in documenting it. And then, yeah, ask yourself, what are the details that are important? Again, like, it might not be comfortable to get down on your knees in the dirt and get your camera low to the ground, but sometimes that is just what you need to do in order to get the right angle to show what you need to show. And then where are your photos being viewed? That's, is it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? Think about how they're being seen. Are they going to be seen really small? Are they going to be cropped? Are they going to, will people be able to see them in a larger format? Just things like that are important to kind of think about. And as you're thinking about those things, it'll inform your photography again. So it's not just like a last minute sort of thought. And then you'll just find yourself being frustrated. So yeah, any thoughts on that? Oh, there's a question here. Is it best to have the live setting off on the iPhones? Live is, just remind me, live is where it takes like almost like a
Yeah.
video sort of thing, and then you can kind of choose. So personally, I would not have that setting, only because it takes up so much data. It takes up so much space. Live setting, I think, is most useful, in my opinion, when you're photographing people, because then you can have that opportunity to be like, oh, they blinked. Oh, now you can back it up, and there's the moment where they're not blinking. Live is cool if you're shooting water, because it gives you a long exposure option. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I would say the live setting, it kind of depends on the data usage that you're kind of dealing with. I find my phone fills up pretty fast when I use it. And if you're photographing something that's not moving, if it is like plants and stuff, I would probably not use live, and just take multiple photographs. But I think it comes down to space, really.
Yeah, awesome. I just a comment on this photo. So I took this photo of a lynx in Nopaming in Manitoba, and I saw the lynx. This speaks to kind of thinking about the shot before you take it, or thinking about what you're setting out to shoot. So I saw the lynx. I got off my snowmobile. I grabbed my camera. I had my big telephoto, and I get this thing in focus. And it was much closer to me when I first saw it. And I pressed the trigger. And when I pressed the trigger, I noticed that it didn't do anything. It's because the last time I used that camera, I was shooting Northern Lights. So it was a 30-second exposure. So I had to wait 30 seconds for this thing I mean, I just turned the camera off and on and canceled the process. And so then I changed it to kind of a better exposure, but then I clicked it and my ISO settings were way too high. So all I saw was just like, it was just overexposed and bright. And by this time, the lynx is just like trotting down the road, right? So I'm losing this opportunity. And eventually I did get it. It was high ISO, like it was, whatever. One of the settings was off, just put a different way. But in processing, I could tease out the image, but still, it wasn't ideal. And it was just a huge wake up call. Like, okay, I knew I was going out there, and I knew there was a possibility I would see wildlife, and that's why I came prepared with my telephoto. I should have checked my camera settings beforehand, and I should have just been more prepared to take that shot. And I know Laura's on the call here from Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers, and I did some drone work for her near Souris, Manitoba, and I hadn't updated my DJI app before I went there, and Souris has terrible cell service, so I like it took forever for me to get my drone up in the air, and I had to use, I don't know, I had to do some workaround and use Wi-Fi and stuff. Anyway, just to reiterate that it is so important to think about what you're going to do with your camera or video camera before you go out and do it, and just be prepared. That's all.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of the work I find when I know I have a shoot tomorrow, I spend a lot of the time the day before prepping and planning and going through all the equipment, making sure everything is working properly. So yeah, a lot of the work happens beforehand so that when you are at the place, when you're taking the photos, that all of that prep makes the photography process just so much better and smoother, and you're not stressing about all those little details that you can do beforehand. So when you're actually photographing or taking video, all you have to think about is the creative process, or the task that you have. You don't have to worry about all those little things. Yeah, video is a whole nother level in complexity, and there's a lot of things to consider. But I wanted to just kind of say a bit for a single shot video. So a lot of the things that we talked about, lighting and composition, and kind of apply to video. So for example, when you're doing video, think about where the sun is again, and think about composition. If you're doing, again, small details, maybe you center it. If it's a person talking, you might want them either centered or the rule of thirds. Right. So again, plan out what you're wanting to see or what you want to show first. It's always good to make a plan. Like if you you want to do a video where, again, this kind of like this idea of wide, medium, tight. I think it's very natural. It's a little bit more of a natural thing for us to do with video. I think it's tempting to go, here I am, and this is what we're looking at. So it is interesting to think about video as one long kind of continuous wide, medium, tight. So one approach would be to really kind of show your setting and slowly move into whatever it is that you're wanting to show. If it's this plant that is being eaten by bugs, maybe you want to just slowly move into a close-up of the details. But one thing you need to remember is that is try to think of video as photography, where in photography you have one image, you have one still that tells a story. Well, video is very similar. If you're doing video, it's almost better to not move the camera too much, because the viewer can get disoriented very quickly. So instead of like showing something here and then turning all the way around and showing something over there, is there an easier, more streamlined way to show those two things? If let's say you want to compare a plant that has that's been eaten by bugs, and then another plant that hasn't been. Is there a more streamlined way that you can show those two comparisons? Gimbal stabilizer. Jasmine's asking, do you have a recommendation for a gimbal stabilizer with an iPhone? I mean, there's so many brands, but DJI makes like the best gimbals, and then there's another brand. It's called Zhiyun. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. I'll write it down. And then DJI. They are, from my experience, those are like the two top brands. I personally own a Zhiyun gimbal for larger cameras, and it's fantastic. DJI, I mean, they do the drones, they do the gimbals. They're a little more expensive, but they are probably the best kind of prosumer brand for sure. Yeah. Yeah, and if you are going into the gimbal world, again, it's always just really important to move slowly and think about what your audience is seeing. If you go like this, look at this, and look at that, look at this, it can be very disorienting. So it's very important to plan out your shot and show whatever it is you're showing slowly. And then I just have a little note here with shooting horizontally versus vertically. I know there's a ton of reasons to shoot video vertically, but maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I would say film horizontally, because when you watch a movie, it's horizontal. I mean, 99% of movies are shot horizontally, and I think we equate horizontal framing with professionalism. So I'm always like, shoot horizontal unless you're told to shoot vertically. If there's a specific reason to shoot video vertically, but I think that if it's good resolution, you can always crop. Yeah, you can. Yeah, if you're shooting 4K, you can crop to create it into vertical, but then your framing can be yeah, then your framing can be a little bit complicated if you're cropping, because if you're cropping for vertical, then you're really limited to whatever is in the center of your frame. So it's good. Again, I think this kind of goes back to planning who's your audience, what is the platform, the platform that this is going to be seen on. Those are all good things to consider. So I mean, I've done projects where I do both horizontal and vertical. And now one of the most difficult things about video is sound. And I mean, we could do an entire workshop just on sound, but the key thing is try, if possible, if you're doing, like, let's say you're doing like a selfie sort of video, keep the phone close and try to stay out of the wind, which I know is basically impossible out in the fields. But if there's any chance that you can stay out of the wind, because if there's talking and you can't hear it, it's useless. And there's like gear that you can get, little wind socks and stuff like that. But again, that's a whole, it's a whole thing to go down that wind adds the authentic field experience. Yeah. Hair blowing in the wind too. So this is like little tips on the single shot, like when you're doing like when you're not editing. And again, I'm not exactly sure how deep you guys all go into video, but I did want to just go into editing again. This is, so if you are going to take multiple shots and put them together in editing software, whatever software you're using, or I'm sure you can do it on your phone too. Thinking about video again as photography, the less camera movement and showing, like again, video is not what our eyes are doing. You need to kind of think about video as multiple images that are pieced together. Um, once you understand, or once you kind of get into more like, you know, you approach video as photography images, but they're obviously moving. So if the plant is blowing in the wind, it'll be moving, but you don't want the camera to be moving all around. You want to try to imagine multiple images that you're going to piece together. It's kind of like, again, that storytelling with video. If you take a video of a field, you just hold the field, you hold the shot. I have a rule, count to 10. So anything that you take a video of, you want to count to 10 in your head, because when you're editing a video, you need at least 3 to 4 to 5 seconds per thing that you want to show somebody in a video. So I like the rule of counting to 10, because sometimes there's a little blip in the beginning, a little blip in the, you know, when you're trying to like get your shot. If you're counting to 10, then you know you have a solid, nice shot of your field. You go in for your medium, count to 10. Go for your close-up, count to 10. It can be a little bit tedious, but you'll thank yourself when you're editing, and you'll be like, oh great, I can use any portion of that shot, any, you know, so it can be very helpful. So it's kind of like, try to not move the camera when you're doing video. And then, so when you're moving into, if you do want to start moving the camera, again, you gotta plan it first. Why are you moving the camera? What is the purpose of moving, showing here and then moving over to there? You gotta just think about those, the reason for the camera moving. Yeah. But again, you know, with editing, things can get, it's a whole nother layer. So I'm not sure how much of that, you're doing. So like every camera, every phone is so drastically different. So I was thinking about, should I go deep into settings, but yeah, it can get pretty complicated and pretty messy pretty quickly, because everything is a little bit different, but everything is a little bit the same. So you know, it's just a little tip of like, you know, when you're using a phone, you can do that like tap focus. You press and hold on whatever it is that you're photographing. It's very useful for macro or close-up sort of things. I find that can be very helpful. And then, you know, we were talking about file size, but I do think that it's important to set your photos and your video to the highest quality that you have available. So for video, if you can do 4K, I would suggest shooting in 4K. And again, a lot of it depends on the final like presentation of like, where are these things being seen, but I kind of believe that if you can capture higher quality, you should, because the whole process of you capture at the highest quality that you can, and then we all know that it'll get worse and worse and worse depending on the processing that we do with it. Or, you know, you put a video on YouTube automatically compresses it. So it's better to start high and then work your way down, you know, because you slowly lose quality. Photos, of course, if you have a higher resolution, you have more options in editing, whether that's cropping or zooming, or just generally, you know, adjusting colors and things like that can be a little bit better with higher quality. But again, it's a whole thing depending on what camera you're using or what phone you're using. So those are just like two little tips I had there. Yeah, we didn't really go into like using DSLRs or mirrorless cameras, because again, I'm imagining that a lot of the things that I've seen on Twitter, it seems like a lot of phone and a lot of like automatic settings. But yeah, so I kind of left it at with the assumption that we're using a lot of automatic and a lot of phones. But yeah, so those were just kind of like two little side tips.
Yeah, so again, so thanks everybody for joining us. This is Burr Forest Group's first webinar, and so I appreciate everybody joining us, and of course I appreciate Tyler's expertise in this. I mean, it sounds like I'm being pat here, but I actually learned quite a bit from this as a hobby photographer and videographer. So this has been very, very helpful. So this isn't this is just a free service Burr Forest likes to provide. This isn't a pitchy kind of thing, but I just wanted to let you know that if you want to be in touch with us, or if you want to kind of you want Tyler for a shot or for some video or photo projects, get in touch with us and we'll hook you up. But otherwise, just yeah, go visit burrforest.com. There's lots of there's a list of our services on there, and you can reach out to me. That's my cell phone number. It's my email address. Follow us on Twitter and reach out if you have any questions. But certainly don't feel obligated. Thanks so much for joining us, spending the whole hour with us, and have a great day. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Okay. Cheers, everyone.